episode number 23 of Inside the Vault, a Carolina Panthers podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Smith. This podcast is brought to you by the Keep Pounding Podcast Network, where you can find us on Twitter at KPPounding_FSSN. And this podcast is powered by the Fans First Sports Network at Fans First SN on Twitter. You can follow them. And as always, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Tobacco Road Sports Radio's YouTube channel, please rate, review, subscribe to that as well. YouTube.com/Tobacco Radio. That's where you'll see the YouTube version of these podcasts. Well, here on episode number 23 of Inside the Vault, my latest guest, he is the co-host of the Afternoon Rush on 7:30 The Game, 3 to 6 p.m. weekdays. Follow him on Twitter at Mark Yarbro. Mark, so good to have you on Inside the Vault. Welcome to the show, my man. How's it going?
Good, Ryan. Thank you for having me, man. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. It's so good to have you on. Been meaning to get you on for a little bit of time now, so glad we were able to find a time that worked amidst the storm that the Carolinas are getting today.
Right.
some of the rain. Just to lead in with that, it was a kind of a rainy season for the Panthers this year. 2-15 record is where we were. No one expected that. Even myself, even the most optimistic Panther fans I think out there didn't expect this bad. So just give us a 4,000-foot view of just a quick recap of the season in your eyes. Good things, bad things, and then we'll get into the more granular of the discussion.
Yeah, Ryan, it was funny because when we talked to NFL, people that cover the league before the season started, there was more than one that said, don't judge this season by wins or losses. Judge the season on the progress of Bryce Young. And by the end of the year, how is Bryce doing? Do you feel comfortable that he could be your guy going in, to the future? Well, unfortunately, not only were the wins and losses not very good, but Bryce was not very good. And there were a lot of reasons, I know we'll get into it, of why that happened. But this season, it started badly. It never turned. Obviously, Frank Reich loses his job. And now, you hear people in the locker room yesterday, Hayden Hurst talking about it, is the dysfunction that was going on, that the players even could tell was going on down in the locker room, and too many guys in Bryce Young's ear and all that. So it was pretty much a disaster. Ryan, I don't know how you feel. I think it's the worst season in franchise history. I know there was a 1-15 season. I know there was a 2-14 season. But this season, to me, is the worst because you don't have that high draft pick to fall back on. When all else failed in those years, in 2010, you got Cam. In 2002, you were able to draft Julius Peppers.
Yep.
You got a high second-round draft pick coming up, but that's not a high first-round pick, and it's basically a late first-round pick. So that's one of the reasons why I think this was the worst season in franchise history.
Yeah. I mean, you can look at it like that from that perspective. I think kind of the pot at the end of the rainbow is not coming this year with that first-round pick, number 1 overall, which we traded to the Bears, as we know, for Bryce Young, and essentially traded, and obviously DJ Moore was part of that trade as well. I can't argue with that logic. I mean, I was around for the 01 season. I was around for 2010. Those were bad too, but I can't imagine.
Bought the T-shirt. We did it all, right?
Exactly. Well, let's get into a little bit here before we get into head coaches and general managers. Let's talk briefly about this roster. I had Dennis Cox up here on 999 The Fan. He has the Panthers Playbook podcast. We had our last episode, and he kind of went into that with me here. So I'm going to ask you a few of the same questions on some players. I'll just give you an open book. Players that you think we should re-sign, and then players you think we just need to go ahead and walk. Notable players from this team this year that might be fan favorites or people that might be more popular. So let's start with re-sign. Obviously, Brian Burns is the obvious candidate on the franchise tag. Guys like Frankie Louvu are up. Derek Brown still has another year on his deal, but you want to maybe try to get him done this offseason if you can. So talk about those 3 guys in particular, what you think happens there, and some of the other guys that you think might be key in re-signing.
Ryan, I don't know how you felt. I thought one of Scott Fitter's worst moves, if not the worst move, was not trading Brian Burns to the Rams last year. when he had the opportunity for 2 first-round picks. I thought they should have made the trade then. They didn't. I anticipated by them not trading him that they were going to get a deal done with Brian Burns. Obviously, we sit here today. There's still no deal done. Yeah, he may get franchised. He may be on another team next year. So he would not be my top priority. You mentioned the guy right now. I would put top of the list guys you need to get signed. As you said, he's got another year left. Derek Brown he's a must. You have got to get him locked up. So that would be priority number one for me. Actually, would be Derek Brown. If you want to franchise Brian Burns, look, he did not have a great year for a lot of reasons. You know, he wasn't healthy. The contract stuff obviously played a part in that. Yeah. But I still think he can be a big factor on this defense. But, you know, of those three, I would go Brown, Burns, and then Louisville. I thought Frankie did not have as good a year this year as he did last year when he kind of burst on the scene. I mean, he was okay this year, but I didn't think he had the impact that he had last year.
Yeah. Yeah, and you could argue some of the other guys besides the three of them. Obviously, there's a lot of guys that are not going to be as expensive as the three of them. They're going to be the cheapest, obviously. So guys like, obviously, Gigi Jansen, long snapper, you'll have him back if you want him. You know, we've got guys like Yetur Gross-Matos, who thrived under Ivero's system. Marquise Hayes, a few other guys as well. Any other guys that among those that I mentioned or others that you see you might be kind of a priority if they can get it on, obviously on the cheaper end, which they're going to be?
Yeah, you know, look at the secondary. You know, any of those guys in the secondary, I thought Troy Hill did a nice job. You know, he was kind of an by the way pickup they got. I thought he came in and did a nice job. I can't remember if it was like a 1 year or 2 year deal, but I certainly wouldn't mind having him back. A guy I don't think will be back, I think you could kind of read that in the exit interviews, is Shaq Thompson. Now, I think we were all kind of shocked that he was back this year. And obviously he got hurt and didn't play much, but I don't see him in the future here on the defense. And really, Ryan, anybody else, you know, that's up, if they're back, okay. If they're not back, I don't think it's going to make that big of a difference if they're not back.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Shaq Thompson did get re-signed this year on I believe it was a 2-year deal, I want to say, and unfortunately, like you said, this year was obviously a wash with the injury. You know, that would be a big loss for the Panthers long term. But as you said, Shaq has been an elder statesman on this team, and you know, linebackers are not injured.
He's been injured a lot lately. That's as you get older, that's teams start finding reasons if they want to move on, and that would probably be at the top of the list of why you'd move on from Shaq. Is just like he just hasn't been healthy enough.
Yeah. Well, other guys to walk. I want to just bring up a few guys really quickly. You just mentioned Shaq Thompson. What do you think about Jeremy Chin? I think there's a lot of buzz with him. You know, Evero's defense, you know, they talked about using him a lot more this season. And was it his lack of coverage skills? Was it something else? Why do you feel like he did not get as much playing time as he had in his rookie year, especially, and then just it seemed like it decreased over the past couple of years?
Yeah, you know, Ryan, and you mentioned it. We heard in the offseason how they had this grand plan, how they were going to use him, but we never heard the grand plan. They just kept talking, well, we're excited about all the different ways that we're going to be able to use Jeremy Chin. But when they were asked about it, they never would give you, you know, exactly what that was. Yeah. And then the season started, and he just wasn't a non-factor. And the times he did play, there was, I think, this game in Miami, he wasn't very good, and he's not been good for the last couple of years. And I don't know if it was just him and Evero's just didn't see eye to eye. They just could never find really a way to use him. But he's a guy that you know, after his rookie season, I think we all had grand illusions of, you know, multiple Pro Bowls. This guy's going to be such a difference maker. And it hasn't happened since that rookie season. It's been a big disappointment. I don't know really why it hasn't worked out. As I said, I don't know if it was just him and Yarbro didn't mesh. I think his play had something to do with it, but they really, even though they told us they had grand plans for him, it felt like they never could really find a great spot to use him in.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens as we go down the pike. I'm sure there's going to be guys that are re-signed, guys that are let go. Obviously, that's how it works in the NFL. We'll see kind of as we get closer free agency into March. But first set of business is hiring a head coach and a GM. So we'll come back to the free agent targets as we get to the draft talk. But let's go into head coaching candidates. Panthers have requested interviews from 9 different folks. So I'm going to read the names off for those who might be living under a rock or maybe just haven't viewed Panthers.com or Twitter. I'm calling it Twitter for those who know me by now. I do.
I'm with you. I'm still Twitter here too, Ryan.
I refuse to call it X. Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, presumably the number 1 candidate in a lot of people's eyes. Texans offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick. Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan. Cowboys DC Dan Quinn, former Seahawks DC, former Falcons head coach. Ravens DC Mike McDonald, formerly of Jim Harbaugh's staff at the University of Michigan. Dolphins offensive coordinator Frank Smith. Rams defensive coordinator Raheem Morris, interim head coach of the Falcons at one point, I think, of the NFC South. Also coached the Bucs, I believe, for a time. Ravens offensive coordinator Todd Monken, who led Georgia to the past 2 national championships before jumping to the NFL with the Ravens. And then finally, Bucs offensive coordinator Dave Canales, who was with Geno Smith in his resurrection year in Seattle last year, and now has made Baker look like a revolution in Tampa this year. So those are the names on the list. Supposedly Jim Harbaugh was interested in our team. So that name has not appeared yet, but from some of the sources I've talked to, it seems like Jim is interested. The Panthers have reached out to him. So your thoughts on that potentially? And Bill Belichick has also inquired about Tepper and the Panthers. So those 11 names that I mentioned, thoughts on all those candidates just as a whole, and who would be your top targets if you were the GM?
Well, should I throw one more name into that bunch? I mean, he got fired today. Mike Vrabel, is he a guy that you would consider bringing in here as well? So maybe there needs to be 12 guys in the hopper.
Culture-wise, yes. I think Tepper has got his eyes set on an offensive-minded coach. But Vrabel as a culture CEO type guy, a Dan Campbell, a Nick Sirianni type guy, yes. I think. And Vrabel knows defense as well. So, yes, I believe it's malpractice if you don't at least give him an interview, in my opinion.
Yeah.
At least.
I think I'm going to join probably everybody. My assumption would be Mike Vrabel, if Bill Belichick leaves New England, is the top of the list for the Patriots. I would think that would be the guy that most Patriot fans would want to say. It could be a moot point. You mentioned Ben Johnson. He was my guy last year, and he obviously decided not to come here for the interview, and that ended any chance of that happening. I guess my question would be, what's changed in a year for Ben Johnson? It seems like things are worse now here than they were this time last year. But obviously, he's, as you said, he's probably the number 1 guy on most people's list. Bobby Slowick, I like a lot. And you look what he's done with C.J. Stroud this year. And I think that's huge. I know you're talking about young guys here, but if you didn't see what he was able to do with C.J., and full disclosure, I preferred CJ over Bryce when it came for the draft pick. I wish they had taken CJ Stroud. They didn't. I was okay with the pick, but if he was my guy. But I like what he was able to do with CJ Stroud this year. So I would say right now those would be my top 2 guys. Would be Johnson and Slowick, and then after that, I mean, look, I'd love Harbaugh here just for material wise. Doing an afternoon drive talk show would be great. It'd be awesome.
He would be.
And look, say what you want about Jim Harbaugh. The guy has been successful every level he's coached. When he started at San Diego, went to Stanford, obviously went to the 49ers, and now at Michigan, the guy has won. So I think I wouldn't anticipate he wouldn't be able to come in here and do a good job. The question would be, could he work with David Tepper?
And how long would he stay? That's the other question.
Sure.
I think, because you hear he tends to rub people the wrong way after a little bit of time, and that's why he was kind of run off in San Francisco. So, right, how long would he stay would be the question if they ultimately hired him. My dark horse, I think if Ben Johnson decides to just spur the Panthers and go elsewhere, and Slowick, let's just say, may not be ready. He's only had 1 year as offensive coordinator experience. My dark horse is Brian Callahan from the Bengals. I think he is very familiar with Dan Morgan going back to their time. I want to say it was either Seattle or one of the other teams I can't remember at this moment. But he has done wonders with the Cincinnati offense. Frank Smith for Miami is another one that I've heard that is very well regarded as well. So I definitely think the two names you mentioned are definitely the top two candidates in a lot of people's eyes, including David Tepper. But I think those other two candidates, if for whatever reason those other two don't work out, I think those two could be two names to watch: Callahan and Smith.
Yeah, and I'll ask you a question here. I'll turn it around. For how attractive do you think this job is across the league?
Well, you talk to people, and it depends. It depends on what version you get, but some people believe that this job is attractive because A, it's 1 of 32. B,
correct.
There are plenty of coaches who want to work with Bryce Young, and 3, as long as you can get Tepper to get out of the way, and that's the $1 million question.
Yeah, it's a big if. Yeah,
they're thinking, well, if Tepper fires me after 2 years, I get a lot of money.
I got walking around money. Yeah.
So, there's a lot to like, I think, about this Panther team from a standpoint of you got to want someone who wants to work with Bryce. That's number one. There's been talk about, and I'm sure you've probably heard this, keeping Yarbro as the DC, assuming he does not get a head coaching job elsewhere, and then have that familiarity back on defense, and then a first-time head coach slid into the offensive play caller / head coach, and then kind of build from there. And so I think that could work wonders. And you already know this probably, but listeners who may not know this, Ben Johnson shares an agent with Yarbro. So both are represented by Richmond Flowers out there. So that's a little nugget for people who may not know that little.
Ben Johnson also native of North Carolina, went to North Carolina.
Yep, went walk on at UNC and from Asheville, yes. And then if you want to keep going down into the rabbit hole, former Falcons coach who just got fired, Arthur Smith, he was a offensive guard at UNC, and could Ben Johnson come here and tell Arthur Smith, hey, come build your reputation back with me with the Panthers, stick it to the Falcons, come be my coordinator?
Possible.
I don't think it's going to happen.
But if you can get Ben Johnson to come here, that's a big win right there.
Yeah.
And let's see what he does with the staff. But that would be a big W for David Tepper if you got Ben Johnson to finally get his white whale, so to speak. He tried to get last year. He wouldn't even get to do an interview, and if he was able to get him this year.
Yeah. Let's keep going to GM. Scott Pitter has been fired. Assistant general manager Dan Morgan is currently the acting GM and personnel decisions. He will be interviewing for the role. And then we reached out and requested interviews from the following folks: Giants assistant GM Brandon Brown, Bucks assistant GM Mike Greenberg, Chiefs vice president of football operations Brant Tillis, Eagles AGM Alex Halaby, Saints assistant GM Kai Harley, Ravens vice president of football administration Nick Mateo, Raiders interim GM Champ Kelly, and Colts assistant GM Ed Dobbs. So I'll start with that list. Who do you like from that list? And is there anyone that you think might be added to this list in the coming days? I noticed Adam Peters from San Francisco, I know, was one name noticeably absent on there.
Yeah, look, full disclosure, I don't know a ton about those guys. Obviously, you look what the Ravens have been able to do, building their roster now into a top seed in the AFC and the odds-on favorite to come out of the AFC to go to the Super Bowl. So I don't think you could go wrong there. I guess, Ryan, my biggest question is how much of a chance does Dan Morgan have to get this job?
He's well-liked in the building.
He's well-liked. He's well-respected around the league. And I know it was reported by David Newton of ESPN today that he's going to get an interview. So,
Yeah.
Personally, Ryan, I don't know how you feel. I'm almost as like I would like maybe just a complete kind of a clean slate. Dan Morgan obviously worked with Scott Fitter, and like you said, he's been in the building the last few years. I wouldn't be completely opposed to it, but I think if I had a choice, I would probably look outside. But I don't think that would be a bad hire by any stretch if they ended up hiring Dan Morgan.
Awesome. Well, Mark, let's get into specifically Bryce and his development now. Obviously, this season was not really about wins and losses. It was more about Bryce's development as a whole. And you could really argue this year there wasn't a lot of development on that end, it seemed like. So, what are some of your keys for Bryce in 2024 and beyond to see in that development in year two?
Ryan, I think stability is a big part of getting Bryce back on track. Look, he had Frank Reich started out as the play caller when he was a coach, and then he turned the play calling over to Thomas Brown, and then he took back the play calling, and then he was fired. And you heard Hayden Hurst in the locker room back on Monday talking about he thought there was too many voices in Bryce Young's ear, and I agree with that. Look, you can say, well, Hayden Hurst didn't do anything. Well, who is he to be talking? There's no argument that he had a down year, obviously, with just he wasn't very productive before he got hurt. But I'm not saying he's wrong for what he's saying because I agree with him. I think there were too many voices in Bryce Young's ear, whether it was Thomas Brown, Frank Reich, Josh McCown, you fill in the blank. He had too many people. So I think stability next year will go a long way in helping him. Obviously, stabilizing the offensive line will help him. There were injuries. Guys did not play up to what we had seen the previous year, notably Icky, who I have major concerns about at left tackle again. I thought that was a position the Panthers had addressed, and we weren't going to have to worry about that anymore. And I don't know how anybody can sit here, after the season and go, yep, feel good about left tackle. Hopefully Icky improves. There's been talk. Do they move him to guard? Where some people think he may be stronger, but then you got to go out and find another left tackle. Do you move Brady Christensen back to left tackle?
That's the only logical explanation I think would be to move Christensen back to left tackle. But hearing Icky talk about that, he doesn't want to do that. And
no, right.
And I think I don't remember who it was now. It was a former offensive lineman who was on another podcast. And I don't remember his name, but that's okay. He said a lot of the left tackles, especially, they peak in year 3 is kind of when that development comes to a head. And I think Icky is going into year 3 next year. So hopefully that's the case for him. He comes back this offseason with a lot of good technique, gets stronger, improves in the weight room, improves in the film room, and just watching and seeing what he kind of did as a sophomore slump this year, and then goes into year 3, and we just see a world of difference with Icky. So
he needs to get better. Obviously, the guards need to get better. Corbett came back from injury, and then he got hurt again. Chandler Zavala did not play well in his time out there. That was a draft pick. So stability with the coaching staff, stability on the offensive line. And then, Ryan, I think you and I both agree on that. You've got to upgrade your receiver room.
Yeah.
And that maybe that means you've got to deal, Adam Thielen and get extra draft picks, but you have got to address the wide receiver room. It's not good enough. It's not. Adam Thielen, commendable year, but even with all those catches, he didn't get in the end zone a whole lot. And a lot of that has to do with Bryce Young, but DJ Chark. Chenault, Terrace Marshall, obviously he's not going to pan out. Mingo was okay, but he's got a long way to go.
For a second-round pick, he did not impress.
No, he didn't. And I don't know how you felt when they drafted him. And before the year, on our show, I talked a lot. Hey, by the end of the year, I would be great if you could sit there and think, you know what, Jonathan Mingo has a chance to be a solid 2 and maybe a 1. Well, right now, Ryan, he's borderline 2, probably closer to a 3 than he is a 2. So, you've got to improve that receiver room to help Bryce out. Bryce did not play well, but he didn't have a lot of support helping him this year.
Yeah. Well, let's get into before we get to the draft. Just briefly for those also who, as I said earlier on the podcast, has been living under a rock. Tepper ownership group has hired the search firm Sportsology Group, who in the past advised the Rams, who eventually hired Sean McVay, and the 49ers with Kyle Shanahan. Your thoughts on the Sportsology Group using their resources with Tepper, and do you think, one, is it going to make a difference, and two, what was your thoughts on the search firm?
Search firms are fine, but I think it goes back to something we addressed earlier in the podcast. How much is David Tepper willing to get out of the way and
Yeah,
let whoever they come up with do their job? I mean, if they can go hire the greatest football operations guy out there, but if
right.
David Tepper still has his hands all over everything and in the cookie jar and trying to make the cookies and everything, it's not going to matter. So, the search firm's fine, but until David Tepper looks in the mirror and goes, you know what, I'm a big part of the problem here. I need to take a step back. I don't know if it's going to matter who the search firm comes up with, because it's going to be like a dog chasing its tail. It's going to be the same thing over again.
Yeah. Well, let's get into free agency really quick, and then we'll end on the draft and predictions. Free agency, we mentioned receivers. Who are some of those receivers that you would target if you were the Panthers and wanted to spend some of that $40 million approximate in cap that we're going to have this offseason?
Well, a name I know has been popular. People around here, T. Higgins of the Bengals is a guy that a lot of people have, said, hey, let's bring him in. Now, I did hear Joe Burrow speak the other day. He seemed pretty confident that they were going to have T. Higgins back in Cincinnati. But he's certainly a guy. Again, I don't know if he's a number one, but he's certainly an upgrade over what you've got right now, I think. So
Yeah.
I don't know if they're going to be able to go out and find a number one per se, in free agency. But if you get enough guys who can at least be a two, I think that could kind of help the situation out.
Yeah, I mean, you got him. You've got Michael Pittman Jr. from the Colts. Mike Evans, who is 30, with the
Yes.
Bucs, our arch rival. And I thought I saw somewhere Brandon Ayuk is a free agent for the 49ers, but I might be wrong on that one. He might be a year.
Yeah, and I mentioned Michael Pittman. I love Michael Pittman. I do wonder, though, would the Colts be willing to part ways and let him walk, knowing how important he could be for Anthony Richardson, when he gets back into the fold next year. So, but
Yeah.
if they could get their hands on Michael Pittman, that would be outstanding. He had a great year.
Yeah. Other than receiver, what are some positions specifically in free agency that you think the Panthers will target this offseason to upgrade the roster?
Well, I think you have to look at the offensive line, obviously, see if they can address, like I said, maybe they have to address the left tackle position. Maybe they feel like they've got to make a change there and move Icky to guard. So that's certainly an area. The other edge rusher, seems like we talk about this every year now, like the old left tackle we used to talk about every year. Now it's the other edge rusher. Who knows, Ryan? You may have to get two edge rushers, because we don't know what's going to happen with Brian Burns. But you have at least got to go get one edge rusher, I think, in free agency, because Derek Brown, you don't want him to be wasting away there doing the job that he's doing when you don't have any rushers on either side of him.
Yeah. We did see a few re-signings earlier in the day. We didn't talk about this earlier, but Dan Morgan, who is the acting GM, some smaller signings, Stephon Sullivan, tight end, who got some catches this year, LeBron Ray, and Nick Thurman on the defensive line. So we have a few depth pieces coming back on defensive line and tight end, but I would agree, shoring up some offensive line depth would definitely be key. Edge rusher. And then I was also looking at another corner or two, because okay, fine. Let's say J.C. Horn stays healthy next year. Cool. He's your wide receiver one, or corner one. That's fine. That's one corner. Dante doesn't have the ability to stay healthy. He might be a cap cut. We didn't even talk about him getting cut. He might be a June 1st cap cut. C.J. Henderson, they're going to let go. Troy Hill's a free agent. So I think corner is definitely high on that list.
Yeah, and we've seen what happens when you're starting frontline corners go down. Well, unfortunately, we've seen that too often around here in the last couple of years. So I would agree with you. I think depth at the corner position. And look, I thought Troy Hill came in. He was, people looked at it as, oh, by the way, he's signing there. But I thought he came in and actually did a nice job. But yeah, I would agree. Depth at that corner position, they're probably going to have to address that as well.
Yeah. All right, let's get into the draft and get some predictions, and we'll get you out of here. So this draft, very strong in the receiver area. If you like receivers, this is your draft. The Panthers obviously need receivers. We mentioned O-line. We've mentioned corner, edge rusher, perhaps get a running back in the later rounds, as those are always available. What do you think is the strongest position in this draft? And do you go offensive line, or do you go receiver at pick 33?
I agree with you. I think receiver is probably the strong part of this draft, and I think you have to go heavy receiver. Really heavy offense, whether it's receiver or offensive line. But as we talked about, the receiver room that you have right now, it's just not good enough. And whoever the new GM is, you're going to have to come in here and address that. If it's not through free agency, then obviously through the draft. So I think that's an area you've got to help Bryce out. You've got to give him a little bit of help. He's just not right now in a position where he can, basically go out and win games with whoever he's got out there at receiver.
Yeah. If you had to guess, who would you say would be the pick at 33? Let's say they go receiver. I like Troy Franklin from Oregon personally. I also like Adonai Mitchell from Texas. Those are the two guys that I would keep an eye on there that might realistically be there at 33. Do you have any guys that you are hearing or keeping an eye on there?
Yeah, I haven't really heard any chatter yet about who they could be looking at that, but I think you hit on two guys. I think either one of those would probably be upgrades of what you've got right now. And because as you look at it, Ryan, where you're picking there in the second round, it's basically a late first round pick is what it is. So whoever it is you end up taking is basically a late first round pick. So you would like to think they could come in here and have an immediate impact, because we just haven't seen it with the last couple of receivers that were taken, whether it was Terrace Marshall, Jonathan Mingo. I know it's only 1 year for Mingo, but we know Terrace Marshall is not in their plans going forward. That's obvious. Mingo, not ready to give up on him, right, but it looks like he's got a ways to go yet.
Yeah. And so before I get into the last, into the predictions, so this is a theory I have for the receiving room. You make Thielen your number 3 next year, Mingo's your 4, and then you have a rookie. Your top draft, that number 33 draft pick is your number 2. Come in and instantly upgrade the room, and then sign a T. Higgins, a Michael Pittman Jr., somebody along those lines to get you to that number 1 receiver. And then boom, it's not perfect, but your receiver room is much better than it was last year. Yeah. But my question in my theory, though, is this. We saw Terrace Marshall Jr. get a lot of reps under Steve Wilks in the interim campaign last year. This year under Reich, it was up and down. And then once Reich was fired, it was basically as if Chris Tabor didn't play him. So here's the question. Is it just that Terrace Marshall is not putting it all together? Or is it he has just not been in favor with anybody not named Steve Wilks, and he hasn't really been given a chance to really succeed? Or is it a combination of both?
I guess my comeback for that would be, if he couldn't get on the field, Ryan, with this receiving core, whether it was at the end of Frank Reich's tenure or when Chris Tabor took over.
Yeah.
My question is, to me, that answers everything I need to know. I don't look at it as he was out of favor with Chris Tabor. I just think what they saw in practice did not impress them enough to warrant him being on the field on Sundays. And again, if you couldn't get on the field on Sundays with this receiving group, that to me is a huge red flag.
Yeah.
And look, maybe he does get a fresh start somewhere else, Ryan, and hopefully not in 3 years. He's not a Pro Bowler. We have another podcast. And we're like, you know, boy, if they'd have just given Terrace Marshall an opportunity.
I know Joe Burrow would love to have him back throwing to him. I'm just that's it. Maybe that would work, or he could join his boy Jefferson up in Minnesota.
Yeah.
But he is under contract with the Panthers.
Just bring Jefferson here. Just bring Jefferson to Charlotte, Ryan.
Yeah, exactly. Let's get some tutelage there. Yeah. Well, Marshall is under contract for this next year. Like it or not, he is under contract unless the Panthers just cut him. He is under contract. Anyway, that was my theory about Marshall there. So let's get some predictions. And as I said at the top, my guest today has been in host of the Rush 7:30 the game, Mark Yarbro. Mark, how many years till the Panthers are competitive? Can you answer that for me? 1 year? Is 2 off seasons? 3? What is it?
Let me call over at Mint Moorhead, let them know, and then I'll come back and give you the answer. Right?
Okay.
No, it's hard to tell, Ryan. Look, we've seen, look at the Texans. Texans were going nowhere. They bring in a rookie head coach. They bring in a rookie quarterback. Guess what? Texans are playing the playoffs this weekend, so it can happen. It is possible. It is, but I hate to keep sounding like a broken record, but I think a lot of it will depend on how willing David Tepper is to let people do their job. Hire a good football ops guy, GM. Go out and get you a good head coach and let them do their job. You don't need to be micromanaging. You don't need to have your fingerprints all over everything. If he'll do that, I think it will expedite the process. So, I would say I would like to think this team is a lot better next year. Maybe it's not a playoff team, but if you go from 2 wins to 6 or 7 wins, for me, that's a win. That is, if I'm a Panther fan, that's a huge win. If you can go up, what we're talking about, 5, 6 wins, perhaps, 4 or 5 wins, 6. I think that would be a huge step in the right direction.
Got it. All right. Well, time for some bold predictions. And when I say bold, I want your boldest prediction here on Inside the Vault. We'll start with a layup. The starting running back for the Panthers next year, is it Chuba Hubbard or is it somebody else?
I'm going to say the starting running back is someone else. I think Chuba's still in the mix. I think he's – I just see them going out some – and I know they were burned in free agency with Miles Sanders, and he swears he's going to have a better year next year. You can't have much of a worse year, so I'll give him that.
No.
But I think it will be somebody that is not on this roster right now.
Okay.
I would agree.
Okay. Brian Burns, will he sign the franchise tender and play under that in 2024?
Yes, I believe he will, Ryan. I do believe Brian Burns when he says he loves it here. He wants to stay here. I do believe that, and I do wonder if he could, what his year would have looked like had this contract thing not been hanging over his head. I really wonder. Had they been able to get a deal done back in the preseason, off season, whatever, I do wonder what kind of year he had, because it just. The whole weird start, the way it started in Atlanta, and the hold in or whatever it was called, and it was just a very strange year for Brian Burns.
Will the Panthers be able to keep Frankie Louvu and also give talks with Derek Brown in regards to an extension?
I think Derek Brown gets an extension done. I've said many times, right now, if I was the Panthers, that actually would be my number one thing to get done, would get Derek Brown locked, get him an extension done, because I think he has proven he is one of the elite defensive tackles in this league now. As far as Frankie Louvu, I do think they find a way to get Frankie done as well. Did not, to me, have as good a year this year as he did last, but I think he's a guy, particularly at that position. It's not the strongest position on this team right now. I think he is by far the best linebacker they have, and I think they'll reward him for that.
JC Horn, obviously, this won't be a actual prediction, but I do not think the Panthers will be picking up his 5th-year option. My question though is, Will JC stay healthy in 2024? And ultimately, that question will then say, will he be on this team in 2025 and beyond due to a long-term extension or a franchise?
I agree with you about them not picking up the extension because I don't know how you can. He just his durability is a factor, and I can't, in good conscience, sit here today and tell you, yeah, he's going to stay healthy and he's going to be. We haven't seen that yet. We
No,
haven't, and
you're
it
right.
just always seems to be something up with JC's health, and whether it's what was the toe injury late in the year or getting hurt in the offseason or whatever, it just seems like it's always something. So he's going to have to prove to me that he can consider. We have seen him stay healthy in small samples, but not anything consistently where I would be bold enough to say, yep, I'm confident he can stay healthy and stay on the field.
Okay.
And Ryan, the thing is,
Yeah.
we've seen him when he's on the field. He's a difference maker. He can be a difference maker. But just you can't depend on it.
No. Just a few more, and we'll get you out of here. Ike Ekwonu, will he stay at left tackle next year, or will they move him to guard?
I'm going to say he starts at left tackle, but I think the leash will be very short. If he starts struggling, I think they will make that move. But I will say at least to start the season, he is still at left tackle.
Okay. All right. Last three for you. Biggest Panther to take a leap next year. Someone currently on the roster that is here now.
Whew. I think we started seeing him take some strides in the right direction. We've been waiting for the last couple of years. I'm going to say Yetur Gross-Matos takes a leap next year. I liked what I saw from him the last month and a half, 6 weeks or so. And we talked about earlier about that other edge. Man, if he could somehow emerge as that guy, that makes things a lot easier. So you wanted bold prediction. There's a bold prediction. Gross-Matos takes the next step.
And for devil's advocate, since you mentioned defense, who's your offensive guy? Do you have one there?
I think it's going to look a lot different. So it's hard. I would love to say that Miles Sanders rebounds and is a lot closer to the Miles Sanders we saw in Philadelphia. This is not a bold prediction because, again, he can't get much worse. But I do think we see a better Miles Sanders next year than what we saw this year. And again, I think the receiver room is going to look so different. I'm not sure who I can pinpoint right now and say, yeah, that guy's going to take a step forward. So hopefully it's a rookie that they draft or a couple rookies that they draft.
Yeah. We'll stay on that front. All right. Last two, I know this may put you on the spot. Who will the Panthers hire as general manager, and who will hire as head coach?
Oh man, Ryan, general manager. I don't have right. I don't know who that could be. Head coach. I'll give you head coach. GM. I don't know.
We'll say Dan Morgan for now, since he's the acting GM.
Okay, all right, fine. You can hire Dan Morgan. All right, I'm going to say Dan Morgan. Then we'll hire as the new head coach of the Carolina Panthers. I think Frank Smith, the offensive coordinator for Miami Dolphins. I don't think that Dave Tepper is going to get his white whale in Ben Johnson. I think he's going to end up in Washington. I don't think he's going to get any of the big whales out there otherwise. So I think Frank Smith, I don't want to say he's going to settle for Frank Smith, but I think that's the type of guy you're looking for. I think it's going to get the job here.
Well, that's a perfect way to end it. We'll see what happens. Mark, so good to have you on. Thanks for coming on here Inside the Vault, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Ryan, thanks, man. Enjoyed it. Take care.
And that will wrap up this episode of Inside the Vault, episode number 23. I'm your host, Ryan Smith. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We'll see you next time.